Welcome to the Evergreen Memorial Cemetery. This is a story of the cemetery and grave markers. Cemeteries are nearly universal, appearing in virtually every culture throughout time. Even the earliest nomadic cultures built permanent dwellings for their dead. Burial sites became places where the living could return to visit their ancestors. As Christianity took hold, people began to bury their dead in or under religious buildings. By 752 AD, churchyards became places for burials and thus the beginnings of modern cemeteries. In the 19th century, cemeteries became freestanding as the churchyards filled up. In the early 1800s, a Parisian trend established the construction of garden cemeteries landscaped with pathways, rustic vistas, and winding avenues. The term cemetery connotes a transition to a place of rest. Evergreen Memorial Cemetery was originally two cemeteries, the Bloomington Cemetery and just to the north the old City Cemetery. No one knows precisely when the City Cemetery opened. Some sources say John Kimler first buried his child on the piece of ground later to become the cemetery. Mr. Kimler gave permission to his neighbors and friends to bury loved ones there as well. In this picture, that would have been down at the bottom of the hill in the far distance. Here we are at that spot. The first mention made of a city burying ground dates to March 10, 1851. At that time, messengers Coffey and Ward were appointed to confer with the owners of the graveyard. They were to offer the owners $50 for the old ground and $25 for 1 acre south of it and procure the deeds for the city. The original purchase of 2 acres is now the most northern portion of Evergreen. It was never subdivided into lots. People selected spots and buried their dead any place without lots or title deeds. Interestingly, until 1873, you could bury a body anywhere you wanted. Some people were buried in their backyards. In 1873, the city of Bloomington passed an ordinance stating people had to be buried in cemeteries. During the ensuing years, the city purchased land to expand the cemetery, and with the exception of the original old burying ground, it has been platted and subdivided into lots. This grid formation contrasts with the winding avenues of neighboring Bloomington Cemetery. The Bloomington Cemetery Association incorporated and organized on February 16, 1857. It was laid out in the Parisian garden style. Linus Graves gave the land for the profit-making venture, serving as secretary of the association and supervisor for 40 years. After his death, his son Arthur J. Graves assumed the same post and continued as manager of the cemetery and the adjoining Maplewood greenhouse for another 40 years until his death in 1938. As we look west out the gate, the Maplewood greenhouse was on the northwest corner of Miller and Wright Streets. This is the lot where it was located. The greenhouse provided a constant supply of fresh flowers and was used to winter exotic plants such as palms, which were planted on graves in warm weather. The cemetery's original charter provided for 25% of the funds from the sale of plots to be used for improving the cemetery. Perpetual care was not sold with the lots at this time. Individuals had to provide it through their estates. As descendants moved away or died, the plots were left unattended. A perpetual care trust fund was established in 1907, but it was not enough. These are pictures from 1916 showing the overgrowth. This is the office hiding behind the vine. And here is at the entry circle and looking west out the gate. Directly ahead, that's the office behind all those trees and overgrowth. This is the big circle, which would be unrecognizable except for the McNulta monument. By 1955, seeds of neglect had crept into the cemetery. There were dead and broken trees with the tangled growth hiding the graves and cemetery paths. Burial and deed records were incomplete, and often it was necessary to probe the ground for unoccupied burial plots. Sales of burial plots declined because of the inferior physical and business conditions of the cemetery. In a Panagraph article on August 21, 1955, attorney William J. Bach great-grandson of the founder, reported that the cemetery had not paid its way in many years and proposed having the cemetery taken over by the city of Bloomington. The city, however, owning the nearby city cemetery, did not want to assume this new burden. For the next 10 years, irate citizens found little accomplished in correcting the conditions surrounding the cemetery that held so many great former residents of Bloomington. Conditions had not improved during the years, and on May 28, 1962, a delegation of interested citizens showed up the city council chamber seeking city help for cemetery cleanup. They came away with high hopes after receiving a promise of action. During the next year, Mayor Robert McGraw appointed committees to study the matter, and several proposals were made, including form a not-for-profit organization to be responsible for raising funds to maintain the cemetery, or turn the cemetery over to Bloomington Township. The state of Illinois passed the Cemetery Care Act in 1948, providing rules for the fiduciary conduct of cemeteries, and then the Public Graveyard Act of 1957, which provided for townships to levy taxes for the care of cemeteries and taking ownership of cemeteries. The city itself could not do this. The stockholders agreed to this second proposal and received the annual interest accruing from the $80,000 perpetual trust fund, but refused the greenhouse. On October 22, 1963, the State of Illinois audit found everything in order in the Bloomington Cemetery Association Trust Fund, removing the last barrier to the Evergreen Memorial Cemetery. The cemetery had been referred to as Evergreen as early as 1883, but some people objected to this term due to the lack of, you guessed it, evergreen trees. Many improvements were made in the following years. Leaves were cleaned up and trees and shrubs trimmed. Newly sown grass seed gave the cemetery a chance to live up to the name Evergreen. Eagle Scouts restored the Civil War section and painted the quarter-mile of chain-link fence along Lincoln Street. While work continued to improve conditions at Evergreen, an old problem arose. Vandals overturned 200 markers in the years 1984 to 1986. It is an ongoing issue and very hard to predict. In an effort to prevent further vandalism, Evergreen Memorial Cemetery, the McLean County Museum of History, and Illinois Voices Theater developed the annual Evergreen Cemetery Discovery Walk to teach the community about the historical importance of cemeteries and the need to treat them with respect and reverence. The beauty of Evergreen comes from the winding paths, pastoral views, and monument architecture. Very early markers were wood, which would not last. The preferred materials for markers is stone, which is quarried. The different types used in monuments include marble, sandstone, and limestone for early stones, and granite becoming popular after 1880. Stones are rated in hardness on the Mohs scale, that's M-O-H-S, which was created in 1812 by the German geologist and mineralogist Friedrich Mohs. He chose 10 rocks of differing hardness and numbered them from 1 to 10, 1 being talc and 10 diamonds. It's a non-linear scale. Going from one number to the next, the rock could be 100 times harder than one before it. For example, marble, sandstone, and limestone are in the 3 to 5 Mohs range. Granite is in the 6 to 7 Mohs range and is 100 times harder than any marble, sandstone, or limestone. Marble comes in many colors, white to green to black. The color comes from the minerals and rocks present at the formation of the marble. Georgia marble is white and Vermont marble is creamy. Green marble comes from Italy. I have not seen any green marble in Evergreen Cemetery, but this is a sample from the Old Courthouse Museum downtown. Most 19th century marble monuments are eroded by the weather to the point you cannot see the inscriptions. This marble looks like it is melting. To identify marble monuments, look for the sparkling crystals in the stone that become visible after the polished surface is eroded. The best time to identify stones is on a bright, sunny day. The marble usually shipped to Bloomington in large blocks coming from the quarry by train. Local marble works carved the monuments using templates. The marble statuary required more artistry and shipped by railroad in finished form from the east. The local monument company then erected it on either a marble or granite base. This picture shows two examples of statuary. The Withers monument on the right has the maiden atop a pink granite column. Then on the left, the statue is on a marble block and a limestone base. Sandstone can be cream, red, or blue-gray in color. The tall monument in this picture is very likely cream color sandstone. Limestone could be obtained locally, meaning in the Midwest, and is slightly harder than marble. It is easy to carve and often used for more intricate designs. In this case, the mayor name is excised, which means that the material around the letters was removed, leaving the letters to stand out. White bronze is an alloy of copper, tin, and zinc. Its color is bluish-gray. Manufactured primarily by the Monumental Bronze Company of Bridgeport, Connecticut, the monuments are very durable, less expensive than granite, and could be molded into very intricate designs. They sold between the mid-1870s and about 1914. These monuments were never as popular as the manufacturer had expected, primarily because people, I think, thought they appeared to be cheap. The monument is hollow, and that is probably the biggest objection. And yes, I've rapped on it many times, and so far Dr. Schroeder has not awoken to admonish me. There are 3 white bronze monuments in Evergreen. One is very small and located in the Old City portion of the cemetery. As can be seen in this picture, the last one is for a baby. There is a lamb and the name Edmund Stevens. It was made by the Detroit Bronze Company in Detroit, Michigan. The color of granite comes from the feldspar that is present at the time the granite is formed. Each granite quarry will have only one color of granite, though the grain may differ. Light gray stones come from Vermont or Georgia. Pink stones from New Hampshire. This is probably the only cube in the cemetery. I don't know I've seen another one. The cube is a very good example of contrast. The cube is polished and the letters are incised, while the base is the opposite. The letters are polished and the background is regular. This is another example of a pink stone with some gray or black in it. And red stones come from Wisconsin or Missouri. Dark brown stones from the Dakotas. And black stones from Pennsylvania or internationally from Africa or India. Mining granite was a long, laborious process that required significant amounts of explosives and manual labor. It was also difficult to polish before newer polishing machines were introduced in the 1880s. By the first decade of the 20th century, granite was the material of choice for monuments because it lasted longer than marble. This is an early example of granite that is not highly polished. Well, of course, you cannot tell that from this picture, so I encourage you to come to the cemetery to touch it and feel how porous the surface is compared to the newer granite monuments on the south side of the cemetery. Granite monuments are usually cut and polished at the quarry. The blank is then shipped to the local monument company that personalizes the monument to the customer's specifications. This is a raw block from the quarry. Someone ordered it and did not realize their mistake until it was delivered. It was too expensive to move again, so it sits here in the cemetery. I show it to demonstrate how granite looks when mined. Notice around the perimeter where the granite was drilled and explosives inserted. Next, we'll talk about monument shapes. Flat markers lay on the ground and can be bronze or granite. This is a flat marker in red sandstone that was carved by a surviving family member. Tablet is an upright slab, and it can be rounded at the top or not, and the size varies from the very small to large and to even larger. Slant is a more modern type of monument shape. The monument is a low rectangle with one face at 45 degrees where it is engraved. Columns are round, erect cylinders. A pedestal is similar to a column but is square or rectangular upright. Obelisks resemble the Washington Monument in shape. It is a tapered pedestal with four sides that comes to a point at the top. Ledger is flat to the ground and covers the entire grave. It is thought to be a low version of the sarcophagus. This is a ledger monument. There are more along the east side of the cemetery, and they're just flat stones, not the hip style of this particular ledger. Sarcophagus is a large rectangular monument built to resemble an above-ground tomb. They are patterned after the tomb of Roman general Scipio. Monuments could be purchased by mail order. These are probably from Sears, as we have pictures of similar monuments from the Sears catalog. The round cylinder monuments were popular from about 1900 to 1915. You would order the monument and a lettering at the same time. They would be delivered and you could have them erected on a cemetery plot. As you can see, they were set right on the ground. Freezing and thawing of the ground causes heaving. Interestingly, you can purchase monuments online today. I found tablets or slants in your choice of either pink or blue-gray granite. Well, I'm not sure how it is shipped. Seems to me they would be really heavy. And how would you get it erected at the cemetery? Next, we're going to talk about structures in the cemetery. Coping is the low stonework used to mark family or group plots. Some coping is enhanced with steps or corner markers. Here in the Probasco plot, you can see the corner markers are marble and the coping is limestone. Some plots only have corner markers. This one also happens to have a stairs. You see the granite at the corners and the similar motif at the stairs, but with the urns on top. There are benches and chairs seen in the cemetery. These are garden memorials which are used to commemorate a burial. Also to invite the living to sit a spell and contemplate or meditate. The cemetery can be a very serene place, quite removed from our daily lives. The Plum Jackman structure is a crypt. Interments at crypts are from the outside. Notice the 6 squares on the front denoting the burial chambers. The center bottom square is limestone like the structure itself. The other covers appear to be marble. The limestone cover may indicate the chamber is unused. The other structure is a mausoleum. There is a room inside the door and the burial chambers are in the back wall, usually stacked 4 high with one on top of the other. Mausoleums get their name from King Mausolus of ancient Persia, whose burial structure was so grand it was identified as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Receiving vaults held bodies until burials could be done. Before the invention of mechanized digging, the ground could be too wet or too frozen to dig. Vaults were underground and stayed at a cool, even temperature. The first vault, built about 1870, was replaced by this Bloomington vault dated 1888. Today it is used for equipment storage. Obviously, the deceased cannot actively participate in the ceremony. Burial customs are more for the living, as are the monuments and memorials. Monuments and the inscriptions on them demonstrate respect, love for the deceased, and reassurance of an afterlife. They are also a permanent display of religious views and sentiments, and often denote the social status of the family. Starting in the Old City Cemetery, here you see a marble tablet from about 1870. It's interesting decorations on the corners, a palm frond draped over the top and topped with a pineapple. With the erosion on the marble, it is difficult to discern the original detail. The pineapple is a sign of hospitality or a good host. This is definitely very interesting ornamentation on an early marble monument. On the right is a marble pedestal with a limestone base. This may be a truncated column that signifies a death very early, or one that ended tragically, depending upon the interpretation. Behind these is an obelisk where you see two dark lines on it. Evidently it has fallen over at one time and been repaired. The lines are where it has been caulked when put back together. Deterioration of the caulk causes the black lines. Next is a marble tablet that is in good shape for its age. I believe it is 1881. It has vines on each side and acanthus leaves across the top. Acanthus leaves are often used as decorative feature under the capstone for Corinthian columns on buildings. In the cemetery, acanthus leaves often appear to resemble a line of snails along the top of a headstone. It is said that whoever wears the leaves or has them decorating their tomb has overcome Adam and Eve's curse referred to in the book of Genesis, or, to put it in a different way, a symbol of peace in the Garden of Eden. This monument has fallen at one time. Notice the crack across the top third. There were typically no foundations for monuments, and the base was set directly on the ground. Freezing and thawing causes the monuments to tilt and eventually fall if not straightened. It is unknown what piece decorated the top where there is a broken truncation. To the left, the double pedestal shows that one life was maybe shorter. It could have been a husband and wife. This is a typical symbolism in the cemetery. This monument has broken. I show it so that you can see the rod that holds the sections together. The marble that the rod is protruding out of is broken, quite likely from water penetration where the caulks failed and the freezing and thawing caused it to split. The Timmerman obelisk is the tallest in the cemetery at 25 feet. The obelisk comes from ancient Egypt, where it served as a monument to the sun god Ra. In modern times, it was one of the revival forms of cemetery art. Other revival forms include the sarcophagus, the crypt, and the mausoleum. The Egyptian obelisk is a tapered four-sided column that comes to a pyramid point at the top. Think of the Washington Monument. Well, this did not stop modern interpretations, for here is a six-sided obelisk, and this is an eight-sided obelisk with a pointed crown at the top. Moving from the Old City Cemetery to the Bloomington Cemetery, we can see several examples of the symbolism in limestone monuments. The T.J. Bunn Monument has the pomegranate and dove at the bottom, and on the side are grapevine with leaves and grapes. Hands shaking decorate the top, along with a book that we presume to be a Bible. Limestone monuments resemble folk art, which is demonstrated by these twining oak trunks. The trunks may signify a husband and wife. Note the acorns. There's a special parchment-like page to hold the wording. And here is a child's chair done in limestone as well. This monument is for Linus Graves, who gave the land for Bloomington Cemetery. Bloomington Cemetery was always a public cemetery, so we have people of all economic status, blacks and whites, and many faiths. Crosses are seen in Evergreen, but are not as numerous as might be found in a Catholic or Protestant cemetery. And no, that's not a dollar sign on the cross. It is IHS, which are the first three letters of the Greek language name of Jesus, Iota, Eta, Sigma. It is popular legend that the IHS stands for the Latin phrase Jesus hominum salvator, or in English, Jesus the Savior of all men. Below the cross are the letters L over G, which is a cartouche. The cartouche is an adaptation from ancient Egypt, where the pharaoh or god name was inscribed in an oval. The bronze plaque seen here on the Rogers Monument honors a person interred in the South Pacific. The plaque is a cenotaph, which is a sepulchral monument erected in memory of a deceased person whose body is buried elsewhere. Asa Moore has probably the heaviest monument in the cemetery. It is estimated to be about 15 tons. Grand in size, it can be considered rather plain. It is made of granite, and you can see the coarse polishing on the flat surfaces and the rustication on the sides, making it seem to have been chiseled right from the quarry. Then at the top is this wonderful frieze. The blue flag flying here is the UN flag to honor Adlai Stevenson II, who was serving as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations when he died in 1965. Appointed in the administration of John F. Kennedy, Adlai served admirably during the Cuban Missile Crisis. President Lyndon Johnson, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, and their wives attended Adlai's funeral in Bloomington. The monument is austere and is said to resemble the United Nations building in New York City. I will let you judge that for yourself. Turning to the left, we see the Stevenson-Scott plot. The first name in this list is Adlai Stevenson, who was grandfather to the other Adlai. Adlai Stevenson I served as vice president in the second term of Grover Cleveland. There are many prominent and familiar names in this plot. The white monument is a fine example of Victorian symbolism. The palm frond across the top signifies victory, triumph, peace, and eternal life. The upside-down torch indicates a life snuffed out. Now we are in the south end of the cemetery, which are the newer sections. The Dale Monument is an interesting example of mixing tradition with current styles. The cross, of course, is very plain, and then on each side are these black urns. Using black granite, the monument is a good example of the contrast between rustication and the finely polished surface on the top. Black granite is a newer imported material, and the black granite is not seen in the earlier monuments. The Drew Come Sit a While bench combines a garden memorial with a monument. Also notice the picture in acrylic. Many of these can be seen in the south end of the cemetery. Computer-guided laser etching allows the etching to be more intricate. Here you can see it has a very high contrast on the black granite and can be very detailed, as this is with the stairway to heaven. This is an example of a monument to a child. The tablet monument has a picture of the child and an epitaph. You'll always be in our hearts. You'll be loved and missed by everyone. This is the rear of the monument, showing the child's interests, including the Chicago Bears, trucks, and tractors. The back of the monument to Brandon Auer is engraved with his interests: soccer, baseball, railroad engines, and ISU sports. This is an example of some of the modern shapes. There are several hearts in the South Cemetery. The lettering is incised or chiseled into the granite surface. Although this monument is at the top of the hill above the vault and not far from the Fell and Gridley family plots, it is a modern monument. Some of the old abandoned roadways have been platted for lots. On this monument, the family name and the other personal information are etched into a black granite slab that is adhered to a gray granite tablet. On the left is a cross made to look like wood logs, but it's actually made from granite. The base is interesting in that the rough texture is actually leaves. You have to look close to notice the intricate detail. Then we have urns, a symbol of death of an adult. Some have shrouds indicating mourning, but some do not. Then some shrouds do not cover the urn but are draped around the urn. And other urns are round with no handles, and others are stylized. This urn looks more like a stein. I encourage you to walk in the cemetery and see how many kinds of urns you can find. There are several special sections set aside in the cemetery. Direct center in this picture, marked by the pink granite tablet marker, is one of two areas for children of Illinois Soldiers and Sailors Children's School. The other is across the road to the right and not shown in this picture. There are 3 sections dedicated to soldiers. Inside the coping behind the ISSCS plot is the Civil War military section. This is the military section in the Old City Cemetery. Those buried here primarily served in the Spanish-American War, but there are some here who served in the Civil War. This area marked by the flag and bench is another military section. Located at the southern part of Evergreen, the cemetery has upgraded the section by installing the bench and flagpole. It is rarely mentioned that it was for colored soldiers. Just to the west of the last military section in this triangle area is the first of 2 areas set aside for babies. Come visit and read the poem on the tablet monument at the center of this section. This children's section is full, but the Dorothy Gage Memorial Garden at the cemetery entrance near the office still has space available. This is the cemetery decorated for Memorial Day. There are 8 groundskeepers and 3 office personnel that operate the Evergreen Memorial Cemetery. In addition to the mowing and trimming, the grounds crew straighten and clean monuments, and they do a remarkable job. Well, that concludes our virtual tour today. Thank you for visiting, and I encourage you to try a real tour and walk through Evergreen Cemetery. It is a very restful, peaceful place.